novel in the series.
Well, the funny thing about the War with China series that I did, Bill, is that 10 years ago I kind of pitched that idea around and tried to gin up some interest in people coming in with me on the land warfare and air warfare side to do a series of novels around that scenario. And the answer I got back was pretty much, oh, we're friends with them. It's never going to happen. This is totally unrealistic. All right, 10 years down the road from there, I've done 6 novels in the series. And as you pointed out, had to cover the air and ground warfare aspects myself. And, to judge by the reviews, I didn't do too badly, although certainly the Navy portions are, I think, better.
Yeah, so a couple of those novels, if I've got them right, and I've read all the ones about the China scenario, so Tipping Point, then Onslaught, then Hunter Killer, then Deep War, then Overthrow, and then Violent Peace. I think those were all the China scenario ones, right?
Yeah, we took it all the way from the opening of the war through the dark days of the war, through coming back, island hopping, Marine Corps action in Western China, action in Hainan, and then the aftermath of the nuclear strike.
Yeah, and I'm a huge fan of Ghost Fleet by August Cole and Peter Singer, and I'm just as huge a fan of your series of this, particularly those 5 or 6 books on the China-Taiwan scenario. I think that they're just really well done. And as somebody who's been following the Chinese Navy now for about 15, 16 years very closely, I can tell you that the research that you did had to be very extensive to get them as well and as accurate as you did. You did, I think, a terrific job. And I've talked to people who were in the naval intelligence business and still are and follow China, and they also think that it's a really well done series of novels. So,
wow, high praise. Thank you.
So for our listeners who haven't yet met Dan Lenson, your main character in this series, and what you've got, like 22 books, I think, 22 books in that series. Who's Dan Lenson?
Lenson is a Naval Academy graduate, surface line officer who gradually, over a very star-crossed career, fleets up through command, and then in this latest book, he returns to the vice admiral level. He was briefly a vice admiral during the war, but that was a wartime commission, of course, and he reverted to 06, and then is fleeted up again to a vice admiral to fill the Naval Academy billet, which is currently vacant because we can't promote anybody to vice admiral apparently. But let's not get into the politics of that.
Yeah, and David, you also are a Naval Academy graduate, also a surface line officer. You retired as a Navy Reserve captain. I'm curious, are there autobiographical aspects of Dan Lenson in the books? Is there David Poyer in Dan Lenson?
Yeah, certainly, like all novelists, I drew on my personal experiences, especially for the early books. The Circle was the one that came out second, I think, and that was that drew on my experiences as an ensign in frigates, where our mission was to go north of the Arctic Circle in the wintertime, find the biggest storm we could find and stay in it for as long as we could survive. That was the mission, and believe me, it didn't take a great deal of imagination to turn that into a novel. So the idea was to test a new VDS sonar. We had to test it under the worst conditions to, see if the thing would work in heavy sea states and freezing temperatures and night and day. And so, yes, so that drew from that experience. Some of the others did as well. Tomahawk, which was about the development of the Tomahawk missile, drew from my experience in the early years of the program, helping develop what we called a flying torpedo in those days. I was with the Joint Cruise Missile Program. I was not part of the program, but I was working with them with an independent contractor, and got to see some of the infighting and some of the resistance to the whole idea of a Tomahawk missile. And of course, now the Tomahawk is an integral part of practically every mission that we can contemplate. But there was a lot of resistance to it at the time. So yeah, that one draws from my personal experience. Some of the others do as well. And some of them, as the series goes on, I have to depend more on interviews with people. I have to depend on research, and I have to depend at least a little bit on the imagination and
Sure.
some historical parallels. For example, in the War with China series, the whole action in Western China and Xinjiang is kind of drawn from historical parallels. And even the end of Teddy Oberg, my SEAL Master Chief, who raises a Islamicist rebellion in Western China, even the end of that kind of has a little Easter egg to Joseph Conrad.
Gotcha. So minor spoiler alert here, but we'll try not to give away too much of this book. So in the Academy, Lenson, as you said, is now Vice Admiral. He's just taken over as the Superintendent of the Naval Academy. He has to tackle several challenges that face the Naval Academy itself. Can you describe a couple of those for us?
Well, yes. This is in the aftermath of the war. And of course, in the aftermath of every war, we have to save money, right? We have to, cut back the armed services. There's no more threat. We don't think about the future. We just need to claw that money back. So there's definitely a downsizing going on. That's his number one challenge, is reduced funding. The number two challenge, of course, is politics, because there are people both from the left and the right who are trying to change the Naval Academy. Some of them have some logic on their side. Others do not. And Dan has to sort of pick and choose his way down the channel. He's got, people shouting from this side and people shouting from this side, and political maneuvering. And so that's a challenge for him. Kind of a dual mission there, to act for the best interests of the Naval Academy, to act for the best interests of the mids, and to act for the best interests of the country. And one thing that Dan tries very hard not to do is act for his own best interests. So let's see, what other challenges are there? There's definitely the one about, subsidence of the yard, rising sea levels, storms. That's another, which has particular impact on the Naval Academy of the service academies, because it's the smallest and it's also the lowest, the closest to sea level. West Point has a lot of excess acreage. The Air Force Academy has huge amounts of excess acreage, and they're on higher ground. Coast Guard shares some of the same problems, and Merchant Marine shares some of the same problems, but not to the same extent the Naval Academy does. So that was something he is going to have to deal with. So those are, I think, three of the challenges, and how he addresses them he's going to have to hit the ground running, as well as to deal with some staff issues and changes that he wants to bring about at the Academy. So I think at one point he says something like, I thought this was supposed to be my twilight tour, and it was going to be a sinecure and an easy job, and it turns out to be nothing but. But of course, if it was an easy job, we wouldn't have a novel, would we?
Exactly. So as an aside, I just wanted to, because it was so fresh in my mind, and here at the Naval Institute, we're on the Academy Yard, we're out on Hospital Point. We look down on some of that reclaimed land on the athletic fields out here on Hospital Point, and we are on that high ground. You mentioned it in the novel, where there's a point where Lenson is, I can't remember if he's the super, if he's a mid, looking back on it, but he runs up the Cemetery Hill, which we're on the top of here at the, out here at the Naval Institute on Beach Hall, where we overlook the cemetery, which is the high ground of the Academy Yard. About a year ago now, we had Sarah Phillips, who's the architect of the Naval Academy, come out and brief us on what the Naval Academy's plans are to deal with sea level rise. And that was, it was a fascinating brief. And a lot of that, or similar ideas, I guess, that are in your novel were things that she presented about, raising berms and beefing up the seawalls and, pumps and all that kind of stuff. Did you talk to Admiral Buck, the former superintendent, or maybe even to Sarah Phillips about sea level rise and subsidence here at the Academy?
I did interview Admiral Buck. I don't think we got into that topic. We were speaking about the challenges of taking over the job and some of the internal issues and some of the issues of dealing with his superiors and with Congress and so forth. I don't think we got into sea level rise and subsidence in that interview, but several years ago, I did do an article for Shipmate magazine about, I think it was called something like Neptune Will Have His Revenge. And it was, and it covered, I went into fairly great depth, both the geology and the settling issue and the sea level rise issue and several others in depth in that article. And so I had already done a lot of background thinking and research about that when it came to time to be writing this book.
Yeah. It was one of the things that was interesting. It certainly came up in our minds on the staff as Sarah Phillips was talking about, this Naval Academy 2050 plan, which is how they're going to kind of harden the Naval Academy for a sea level rise. And, you can't be here without understanding that, what our fate or the Naval Academy's fate is very much intertwined with the city of Annapolis as well, right? And we abut each other, so you can't save one without the other. So, the Naval Academy has to work with the city and the governor's office, and they have to work with the Naval Academy as well, because there's so much waterfront property that runs up against each other. And some of that was in your book too, where Lenson, as the superintendent, is in the midst of a crisis, talking to the mayor and talking to the governor's office. And so I found that to be, I don't know, prescient, I guess, is a way to put it.
I hope you enjoyed the linkages between his past and present, because the book actually occurs in two time frames.
It does, right.
Dan is a first class mid, and Dan is the superintendent. And there's two different ways of, certainly he's looking at the administration differently as a first class mid versus being the soup. And there's two different plot lines, but I think the theme may kind of be the same. But what did you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I found that was both an interesting and a challenging thing for me as a reader, as you're toggling back and forth between current day Superintendent Lenson and long ago Midshipman Lenson. There were also a lot of flashbacks to other chapters or other books in the series, right? So things that happened during the war, for example, again, spoiler alert, but there's, he has to reckon with charges about when he was commanding officer of a ship in the war with China, and an action that he took at sea to prioritize one mission over saving sailors from another navy that were, on a ship that were sunk. And so there's accusations against him, and he's got to reckon with those early in the book. But I was curious as I read it. Is this the final Lenson book? Because you're doing this back and forth, Midshipman Lenson and Vice Admiral Lenson, and it's very much in his head for a lot of the book. Is this the last book in the Dan Lenson series?
Well, I think I pretty much telegraphed that in the concluding pages, Bill, when he's standing there taking the review and at the march past and holding the salute and flashing back on the critical moments in his career, both the high points and the low points. So the answer is, as far as I can foresee, that's the coda to the series. And after 22 books, I think it's a natural end.
Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't know if you had aspirations for, President Lenson or Vice President Lenson in the future or anything like that. Okay, good.
No, I think
So one of the things as I was reading this, and I've read now, I think I've read about 10 of the books. I haven't read all 22, but I've read about the last 10 of them. And for the first half, I didn't like it quite as much as some of the others, and I couldn't put my finger on why. And then I realized that there is less plot. This is not war with China. And there's also fewer other major characters. In your other book, you mentioned, Master Chief Teddy Oberg, and he's a big character in at least those 5 books where you're focused on the war with China. And he's not in this book. A lot of those other characters are not, or they're maybe mentioned, but they're not
Right.
front and center in this book. So Lenson is in his own head, or the reader's in Lenson's head much more. And I was curious, from a writer's perspective, is that harder for you to write?
Well, let's see. That's a question of narrative perspective, and I think I don't think it's either harder or easier, but it certainly narrows and bottlenecks down what you can show the reader.
Yeah.
When you cover the way Tolstoy covered War and Peace was with different characters, and that's pretty much what you have to do in terms of a war. So that was why with the war with China, I branched out to 5 different characters, and they saw the war from 5 different points of view, including Dan's wife, Blair Titus, who was with the administration and had inputs in the overall strategic direction of the war, which, of course, Oberg saw nothing of, and Dan saw a little bit of, but not a lot. And Aisha Rahim saw practically nothing of it. So that was why I had to resort to what I call a braided narrative, multiple, occasionally intersecting character arcs with the Academy. And also, you'll note with The Circle, the earliest book, it's a single character arc, a single point of view character, and a very tight point of view. Are they easier? I think I enjoy switching points of view because it kind of exercises your muscles a little bit more. But I wouldn't say it's easier or harder.
Got it.
I don't want to go too deep in the weeds on fictional technique here. You'll get me into my lecture mode, and that's not where I want to be.
Well, you teach writing, right? You're a guest lecturer, and you've taught writing for much of your career as well. Talk about that for a minute.
Well, I was with Wilkes University Creative Writing Program for 16 years. And currently I'm with the Ossabaw Writers Retreat, and I'm on the board of the Northern Appalachia Review. And gradually tapering off on things like that. Still doing a bit of writing. Still not really just doing a little bit of symposia and online teaching and that sort of thing, but kind of easing off on that as well, Bill.
Cool. So some of Lenson's personal feelings about the Naval Academy resonated with me. You're class of 71. I'm class of 87. I think you sort of elided over what class, when he graduated. It's a little hard to tell, some of the landmarks in the book, like you mentioned Isherwood Hall, which was there when you were there, but by the time I was at the Naval Academy was gone, right? So I was thinking, well, I was thinking that maybe Lenson was about my year group, somewhere in the mid 80s, but perhaps he's older than that. And, there are a few things that, it's a little hard for me to tell, like exactly when he graduated and, whether there were women, or was it before there were women? There, were women when he was a midshipman. But I think you were a little bit, I'm guessing you were, inexact about that on purpose, right? You sort of brushed over some of those details.
Well, I tried to design that or set it in a kind of generic past.
Yeah.
It's not a specific year, as you noted, and I've never given Dan a specific year. Because I didn't really want to. I mean, I think that, what's the point of doing that? It really limits you. And I kind of like things like the generic future or the generic present or the generic past, and you give the reader enough clues that the reader can sort of understand it, but you're not specifically located. I don't like to tie myself down that way. The only times I actually did that was in the Hemlock County novels, which were firmly set in specific years, and those were not Navy novels at all.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, I suppose if you'd said that he was a class of '85 guy, I wouldn't have liked him as much as I could imagine him '87 or something like that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Oh, okay. Good reason.
but there's some ambivalence. Like I sense in Lenson the way he remembers things when he was a midshipman. That there's a pride in having been, at the Naval Academy. There's a pride in being there, but there's also some, he looks at it both back on it as the superintendent, and then also remembers it as a midshipman. As it's not a perfect place. It's not maybe what outsiders think. Oh wow, this aura of the Naval Academy, right? There's some ambivalence and sometimes perhaps some regret that you sense in Lenson, and that resonated with me. I'm a graduate with similar feelings. For example, he remembers the death of a plebe when he was a firstie. He remembers that he made a big personal mistake when he was a midshipman, and he doesn't look back wistfully on 4 years together at the bay. And I was just kind of curious, why you paint him like that. What does that reflect? Maybe your memories or thoughts about the academy itself, or your interviews with people and how your classmates or others might kind of think about the academy. Warts and all, perhaps. That part of it really resonated with me, and I wanted to get inside your head and just ask why.
Well, the academy is an important event in a person's life, and if you look at how events in people's lives, watershed events like divorce, for example, like going to war, like boot camp, like graduate school, maybe. Marriage, birth of a child. These all have emotional resonance, and not all the resonance is positive. With the academy, I think almost everyone, I hate to generalize, but I don't think very few people would say it's a totally positive experience, because it's such a changing experience. You go in with, it's like boot camp, but a lot longer, and I think a lot more stressful. At least it was when I was there. And I'm sure it still is. It changes you. You go in with a certain set of preconceptions and attitudes and knowledge and abilities, and you come out as a different person. You still have the same memories, but I think your character changes, and it's supposed to build character. Yes, it also changes character, and those changes have to be reflected on. It's not something the first year out of the academy you think, well, here's how I changed, and here's how I will be, and I will be this way forever, and I'm not going to change again. Well, guess what? You will change again. You're like a piece of steel. You're going to, after the stress is gone, you're going to not retain the total bend. You're going to begin straightening again, and some of those straightenings are positive and some possibly negative. So it's a powerful experience, and reflecting on it, as Dan does, it's kind of a mixed blessing. What are your feelings about that? I mean, do you agree or disagree?
No, I agree. It was the academy was hard in ways that I did not anticipate, and it was easy in ways that I didn't expect it to be. Right, and some of the, I found the academics, particularly some of the, things like electrical engineering, where the course material was hard, but the attitudes of the professors was harder. Right? And so there were things like that when I look back, and I just, I cringe a bit. And then I also like Lenson, because I think in the last couple of pages of the book, when he's remembering his time as a midshipman and graduating, that, he's of that ilk, which I was, of I'll be happy to see this place in the rearview mirror, and I don't know that I'll be back here, right? And then he comes back as the superintendent, so that's a life changing or a viewpoint changing event for him is certainly to come back as the superintendent. I wanted to touch because you brought it up, and I thought the way you wrote it, with towards the end.